product matrix is broadly in these categories, right? And this list is not exhaustive by any means. Some people might group it under different heads, but at least I think of experience matrix in this fashion. So the first set is about loyalty and satisfaction, and generally things like net promoter score, customer satisfaction scores, etc., fall in this bucket. The next one is all about usability metrics. So these are things that we measure when we conduct usability tests. Um, Things like task success, task completion time, system usability score. Right? The next bucket is all about how many users are currently using your product, right? And what's the churn like? How many people stop using your product over a period of time? How many people are you able to retain? What's the growth like? The next bucket is more around behavioral metrics. And this is about how frequently do people use your product, right? What's the engagement? What's the adoption for features? What's the repeat usage like? How do people navigate in your product, right? Do they land on this page and where do they go next? Um, the last bucket I feel is I think most people here would know of this. It's conversion, like simple click through rates and drop offs, the funnels that we all are very familiar with. Yeah. Now I'll quickly jump into each of these buckets and cover a few, not in detail, but at least give you a flavor of what lies in these. The first one is about loyalty and satisfaction, and Net Promoter Score is a very well-known and also highly debated metric that a lot of companies use, and this actually measures loyalty on an 11-point scale. Right? It's a very simple question that is asked to users. This is also, most of these loyalty satisfaction metrics are self-reported metrics. So users themselves tell you, right? You conduct a survey and they tell you what they feel like. So the question is, how likely are you to recommend product X to your family or friends? And you can replace this X with your product name or service name. People who rate this survey with a 9 or a 10 are promoters, and everyone who rates between 0 to 6 is a detractor. Um, and 7 to 8 are kind of passives. They are indifferent to the experience, right? And the way to calculate is you deduct detractors from the percentage promoters and you get an NPS score. So theoretically, your NPS score could lie anywhere between -100 to +100. And an average score is considered to be like a 20. A good score is anywhere between 60. Good, like really loyal brands have scores above 70. Now you could argue that, hey, this doesn't tell us anything about experience. This is all about loyalty. But there have been a lot of studies that actually relate loyalty to the experience that is delivered. It's unlikely that you would recommend a service or a product to someone, if you've not had a good experience with it, right? And this survey, the NPS survey, generally also has another question, which is an open text field, right? And users are actually nudged to enter any feedback that they might have in that field. And I think that's also a huge goldmine for designers to look at and derive insights from. It's not just the NPS score that we need to look at and worry about. Right. Similarly, there is a customer satisfaction score, very similar kind of a question. This is measured on a 5-point Likert scale. A 5-point Likert scale is very often used in surveys, and it's again a very simple formula to calculate your customer satisfaction score. There is another similar score that is called the customer effort score, and the question there is how easy was it to deal with our company today? And again, a 5-point Likert scale, extremely difficult to extremely easy. And again, you can figure out what kind of challenges customers are facing with your product or service. The next one actually is, I think a lot of people are familiar with. We use this every day, right? When we download a new product, um, which is app and Play Store ratings. Now, again, I think what's very critical here is not just to look at the rating, but the reviews that come, right? The detailed feedback that people give on the Play Store and App Store. There is also a Microsoft store. There is also an Apple Mac store. And each of these have a very similar kind of a pattern. Right? You can look at a product rating, you can look at reviews. Again, a lot of data can be derived out of this. I'll move on to the next bucket. This is all about usability metrics, how usable or easy to understand your product is. And the first one, usability generally be related to qualitative data, because that's what we gather in a usability research. But there is also a lot of quantitative data that can come out of a usability study. I'll show you some examples. So, for example, the really simple one is task success. Right? You could measure how many people were able to complete a task successfully, right? And you could just do a binary rating for these, right? A 1 and a 0. So for example, in this usability test, 5 tasks were tested and 6 across 6 users. And as you can see, task 3 needs a lot, need a lot of improvement, right? So the score is not very high, the task completion rate, whereas task 5 seems to be fairly easy to understand and grasp, and most users were able to complete that. I think what's again important here is not just looking at the task success rate, but also looking at where are people stumbling, right? Where are they encountering errors? Where are things not clear to them? And then work on them. Similarly, there is a task completion time. Again, very simple to understand, right? You measure how much time it takes to complete a task. I think for a lot of B2B products, a lot of products that need repetitive tasks, this is a very critical metric to look at and measure. And Generally, a lower task completion time is better for functional tasks, but you could also have products where you want uh, the time to be longer, right? For example, games fall in this bucket. You want people to spend more time uh, uh, playing that game, right? So I think context becomes very critical, and what you're measuring also becomes a factor of that. The next one is system usability scale. This is actually a survey that's done after the usability test is complete. So you've walked the user through a set of tasks, they've performed them, and now you give this survey to them. It has 10 questions, and each of them has a five. Is The user needs to rate on a 5-point Likert scale again: strongly disagree to strongly agree. The way it's structured is that the odd number questions here are actually in a positive format, whereas the even ones are in a negative format, right? And there is a formula to calculate it. Um, so this measures actually two things. It measures the usability of the product as well as learnability of the product, because there are some questions that focus essentially on learnability. How easy was it to figure out? Um, and Generally, a score of anything less than 50 is not acceptable on this. 68 is considered to be a very average score. So anything above 70 is actually what you should strive for in a system usability scale. I'll move on to user metrics. This is like the next bucket that we have. How many users use the product, right? And I think this becomes very critical for consumer-facing products, where users, you want to acquire users, you want to look at how many users are currently using the product, and how is that base shifting or changing, right? Now, the uh, the first metric to look at is essentially churn, right? Um, and this is essentially what percentage of users have stopped using your product in a given period of time. Churn is generally measured like on a weekly basis, generally on a monthly, quarterly basis, annual basis, etc. And actually, the simplest formula for churn is really simple. You just look at how many people have stopped using your product and divide it by the number of users you had at the beginning of this period, right? And then do like multiply it by 100 to get the churn percentage. But what makes it complex is that you're also constantly acquiring new users, right? So even if you're looking at a month, you've probably added like 500 new users on your product, and out of those 500, maybe 100 have also left. And let's say you had a base of 10,000 to begin with. Now, out of that 10,000, also some thousand have left, right? And then how do you calculate it? So that's where the complexity in the calculation comes. There are different ways of calculating it. Will not get into the details of it, but it's important to know how many people are currently leaving or using your platform. Right? Retention is just the opposite of churn. So retention measures how many people continue to routinely use your product in a given period, right? So both are important to measure, and you could have different strategies to increase or decrease both. Right? Here is an interesting metric, right? So this is actually a little dated data. This is from second half of 2018. And I'll just read out the statement. This is the average 3-month user retention rate of mobile apps worldwide stood at 29% with a 71% churn rate. What this means is that in a period of 3 months, um, most of the mobile apps that are out there in the world, um, they saw an average retention of only 30%, 29%. Right? So 70% of the users left or stopped using that product in a 3-month period. Right? And this is actually um, something to be concerned about if you're creating a mobile app. Right? How do you retain users over a long period of time? What kind of things do you do in your design and experience that brings them back? Right. The next set is around behavioral metrics, and this is about how and how often do users use your product. Um, I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with like active users, sessions, right? So active users are measured in on like a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I've just put a DAU there, but DAU stands for daily active users. You could have MAU, which is monthly active users. Similarly, you could measure sessions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, or sessions per user. Um, and a lot of companies, especially those in the social media kind of platforms, right? They measure engagement with DAU over MAU kind of a metric. So this is about frequency of usage. I don't think this applies to all kinds of products, but it definitely applies to products where you want to create a lot of engagement. You want more people coming in and more frequently. Um, right. So the other ways of measuring engagement could be just looking at content consumption, right? So how much content is being consumed by a user, or which specific features are being used by that user. For example, uh, share usage, right? Or tapping on a media that's embedded in a content, or visits to a profile, or likes, etc., right? Or following someone else, inviting other users, right? All of these kind of indicate how engaged your user base is with your product. Similarly, there are like page views, time spent. You can look at total page views, views per user, page views per session, time spent by user, right? So average session duration, etc. All kind of indicate what kind of engagement you have. Um, right, the next bucket that we have is conversion, and right, this is again, I think this probably is the most easiest to understand, and probably most of the people here would be familiar with this, which is what do users click on, where do they drop off, right? And click-through rate is like the simplest metric to measure this, which is how often is a button or a link clicked. If you're in the world of ads, CTRs is like the key metric there, um, right? There are other metrics as well. We've covered page views, content consumed, errors, etc. Right? Drop-offs is another critical one, where you look at like a funnel view of where people are dropping off. This is I don't know which product this belongs to. This is from Wikipedia, and this shows like a standard funnel that you have where from the homepage the users are navigating to a sign up page, and just between these two there is like a 89% drop off, and then the sign up is like a 2-3 step process, right? And between the first page of sign up and the second page of sign up, there is again a 41% drop off, right? This indicates to users that a lot can be done to improve these two areas specifically. We could look at how do we increase the visibility of this whole flow, um, right at the beginning, right at the top of the funnel. And we could also look at how do we increase the first step itself, right? How do we make that easier to use so that more people proceed to the second step and eventually complete the funnel. Funnels generally, as the name suggests, generally go like this. You definitely see drop-offs at every level. So in this case, the total conversion is just 6% from the total number of users who start this process. Um, right. So I think we've looked at like most of the buckets, and the idea was to just give you a flavor of what these are and what you could look at to measure experience. Right. There are also interesting links between these. So, for example, if you're looking at engagement, right? Um, you could also see that there is a link between retention and loyalty and engagement, for example, right? The more loyal your customer base is, the more people you'll be able to retain, and if you do the right things, you'll also be able to engage them, right? Now, at the beginning of this discussion, we said that there are certain things that cannot be measured in design, right? And a lot of people in the poll also suggested that it's it's pretty hard to measure certain things in design, right? It could probably in some ways be like art. So what are those kind of things, right? What do they translate into? Um, I think some of them are the things that you do for making the experience delightful. So these are, for example, these could be micro interactions that you have in your product. Some of the micro interactions actually help relate users to certain elements on your page or in your flow, and some actually also help learnability. But some could be just smoother transitions from one screen to the other that just add pure delight into the experience, right? Typography, the use of white space, tone of language, some of these become slightly harder to measure, but they do reflect in certain metrics. So if you observe closely, if you make changes to these, and your, for example, certain SUS score might go up, you would see better results on your usability metrics, on the behavior metrics, on engagement, etc. But the delta generally tends to be fairly small with these kind of changes, and they become very hard to quantify.